Coogs house. The Houston Cougars are at least a share of a Big 12 champion, and it might be even crazier than you first thought.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, the daily podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth. And whether you're a Houston fan or just a hater can't step by, thank you for making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. Please make your first listen each and every day. If you enjoy the conversation, but you don't know what to say, tell us in the comments down below. Look, I want to ask about like ladders and cutting nets and those kinds of things. That feels like it's in the very, very near future. How about this? Tell us a favorite title-winning type of story from you and yours. Does not have to be sports related. Can be sports related. It can be Houston Cougars related because the Houston Cougars are Big 12 champs. This was brought to you by FanDuel, and we got more on that fun later. We got to talk about this Big 12 championship share that they've at least got locked up right now. I want to talk about what that could look like turning into a number one seed. Potentially, and if that's even something I think that we want right now as I sit here thinking about this. I do go back and forth, but I've got some thoughts there. And then last but not least, I want to talk about how important finishing, say how to finish, but how important finishing the rest of the season will be for Houston. But first, back-to-back regular season champs. Last year was by 2 full games. This year, you're looking at maybe by 3 or more, depending on how this thing finishes out. As the Times recording on Tuesday evening, going into Wednesday's games, Houston is up 3.5 games with 3 to go. That would mean that Arizona would have to win out and Houston would have to lose out. And even then, they would share the title for the regular season. But there's also this weird thing where Houston's got the tiebreaker that's not official, but is kind of unofficial, where Houston beat Arizona, right? For all intents and purposes, Houston is your 2025 regular season Big 12 champion in men's basketball. It is the first team to do this and was considered a power conference in over 100 years. 100 years. Idaho moved into a new conference and won their regular season title in 1921-22 and 1922-23. Again, over 100 years ago. Think about how chaotic conference movement, building new conferences, all of those kinds of things have been, pulling new schools in, elevating new whatever. Houston's the first team to do this in over 100 years. You're talking like prohibition, right? Like that's how long ago we're looking at. Again, history teacher, right? By day, you're talking about a long, long, long time ago. And I think it's even more fascinating about like where this season, either season, but where this season started, this Big 12 journey, year 2, first year without Jamal Shead. Jamal Shead pops out of the program, goes to pros, doing great up there. And Houston started the season 4-3. Bluntly, I can tell you from my comment section, people were down on Milos Uzan. Didn't think he had what it took to be the point guard of this program. He's grown, developed, and changed that. People were worried about Jawan Roberts and like his lack of usage in the offense in the non-conference part of the schedule. He's carried us to victories across Big 12 play. People were down on Javier and wanted him benched. And he went to the bench and he's flourished in this bench big man role where he comes in and plays about 20, 22 minutes game all out. Just an incredible leap from where that team was. People worried about could Cryer shoulder the load without Shed next to him. People were wondering if Samson could do it without Jamal and Marcus and Quentin and those guys. And they just keep on trucking along. Coaches to win back-to-back Big 12 titles. Back-to-back Big 12 titles. There's only 3 of them. Bill Self, Scott Drew, Kelvin Sampson. I mean, just can't. It just the list is short. Kelvin Sampson only with this iteration. He was in Oklahoma obviously before. Houston's only been here 2 years. They don't have other options, right? Houston in their 2 years has tied the record for most regular season conference wins at 31 1. Now, before you talk to me about how this year there are 20 games, there are 3 games left. They always played 18. So they technically could break that on Saturday in the normal allotment of games. This is pretty incredible for the Houston Cougars. 3 games to go. They might shatter that thing. If they got to the 34 conference wins across 2 years. Again, they're the fifth program to win 30 or more games in conference across 2 years, and the other 4 were all different Kansas teams. Yeah, you heard that right. They're the only non-Kansas program to win 30 or more games in the Big 12 conference across 2 years. Um, I could go on and on about I think it's kind of funny how now suddenly that Houston's defense is in this conference, people are questioning the offenses in it or whatever. It's been a tough conference for a long time. I guess I wasn't paying quite as close attention to it in the teens and whatever, but yeah. LJ Cryer becomes the first non-Kansas player to win 4 Big 12 titles. You got a couple at Baylor, a couple at Houston now, right? I think this is probably the most interesting one about these Big 12 stats to me, right? Kansas has 21 regular season titles in this conference. It's been around 28 years as a Big 12, not the Big 8. That's a big deal, right? 21's a lot. Texas has 3. Baylor, Houston, and Iowa State each have 2. Now, obviously, some of those are shared, right, or whatever. Houston's 2 for 2. Texas in the conference 27 years. Baylor, Iowa State, and Kansas been in the conference 28 years. Houston's tied for 3rd in all-time Big 12 regular season conference titles and has only been in the conference 2 years. Just tremendous. And people want to talk about Houston getting a break here, getting a break there. Houston won this conference, part of this streak, we're talking about over 2 years. They won this conference a year ago by 2 whole games. With Arsenault's Achilles, he missed all the conference play. JoJo Tugler missed about half the conference play. Jawan Roberts was the walking wounded with a scoped knee, the big tape job on the hand. Ramon Walker was out. This year, Jacob McFarland has been out with injury all year long. We don't even know. I mean, it's an unknown quantity as far as what they lost in that injury to the average fan. People were really high on him. He is the tallest player on the team, whatever that's worth. Very highly touted recruit coming out of California. Coming off a redshirt last year and was going to make some noise, I think, and hurt and missed the whole year this year. Ramon Walker's been out of lineup again. Guy can't stay healthy. Part of the reason he plays so hard is, that's like why he's so good, right? But also it keeps him hurt all the time. Emmanuel Sharp has missed chunks of this. He missed a week of the season hurt. He's been out of a couple games. He had to leave early hurt. He's played hurt in others. None of that seemed to be a problem for Houston when they're catching breaks by playing other teams hurt. Further, I didn't hear anyone worried about Houston when they went off and played Baylor last year in Waco. When Baylor was a lot better last year and didn't have Tugler or didn't have Arsenault, right? No one's like, well, Baylor's catching Houston kind of down. Like that wasn't a thing people were saying back then. Again, 31-4 in Big 12 regular season games across the 2 years. And they started off 1-2. They started off 1-2. They won their first game. It was fun. Yeah. They lost their first 2 road games, and the conversations were, "Welcome to the big leagues." They can't do it. What this isn't the American anymore. What are you going to do? You can't win on the road in this conference. Blah blah blah. They're 30-2 since then in the regular season. Here's my other thing I'll say: is all this talk about, Houston catches a break here because this kid at Tech is sick or this guy rolled his ankle or JT Toppin starts out of that or whatever, blah, 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 right? That's people are saying that about whatever they want to say about Houston's games. They're winning the conference by 3.5 games this year and won it by 2 full games last year. If they were only up by a half game and it was the skin of their teeth, you might have an argument. But it's not Houston's fault Iowa State dropped one to Oklahoma State. It's not Houston's fault that Tech dropped one to UCF in their own building, right? Houston fought UCF hard, but won on the road. Tech couldn't beat them at home, right? Like those kinds of things also matter. It's not Houston's fault. Everyone else has been losing, right? The conference is a war of attrition unless your name is Houston, and then you're the one eating everybody. It's very clear. And I just say all to say that some of these like oh, they're getting lucky here. Get like that's starting to bother me a little bit, obviously, uh, because it's bogus. The reason Houston is getting these breaks is because they're taking advantage of every single opportunity because they're good enough. And it just getting me, taking me off a little bit. I'm sure more will come in the following days and weeks and so on as we get to Selection Sunday and all of that. And I want to talk about that Selection Sunday and seating and how things could look in a second. But first, today's show, as we mentioned, is brought to you by FanDuel, America's number one sports book. And when the game tips off the NBA action, the Rockets are, making some noise these days. Just beat the Bucks. When NBA action is just getting started, there's no better place to get on the action than with FanDuel, America's number one sports book. With the FanDuel, you face live bets throughout the game. Even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on that fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in on the action. If you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your bets into a same game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because you can get in on the moment while it's still exciting. Betting on that late game rally, clutch three, you never miss your chance. The app is super easy to use, and when you win, you get paid out instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 back in bonus bets if your first $5 bet hits. That's FanDuel.com. Join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot. $150 back in bonus bets for that first $5 bet hitting. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Parker Ainsworth locked on Coogs. You're looking at Houston winning the Big 12, moving into March this weekend, and what it all shakes down as. Now, going into the Tech game on Monday night, people were looking at Houston as the second number 2 seed. I think Lenardi had them 6th overall, whatever. And to Lenardi's credit, he's come around to the light. Houston's currently, I think, as of Tuesday afternoon, it looked like was up to a 1 seed. And I would imagine Houston's going to continue to be pushing for that 1 seed as things go. People are going to kind of, again, come around to that part of the conversation very quickly, in part because Florida lost to Georgia on Tuesday night. Iowa State lost to Oklahoma State as well. What's going to be interesting watching that one, and this is somewhat of a tangent, Big 12 kind of a topic here, but what's going to be interesting is I can guarantee you there will be double-digit big-name analysts, right? They look at Florida losing to Georgia as this sign of SEC strength, right? Alabama losing to somebody will become a sign of SEC strength. That'll keep happening. But Iowa State losing to Oklahoma State will be like, see, that conference is so good, right? Like that's how that's going to get played out. And I don't know. I mean, I could take a guess at a couple, and I can see you typing in the comments down below which one you think it is. There will be a lot of analysts that pick that out of that, and I don't know how I feel about that one. Alabama has already dropped to number 6, anyway, behind Houston. Duke will have a 1 seed. Auburn will have a 1 seed. I think Houston gets one, and I'd imagine one other SEC team gets one, whether it's Florida, Tennessee, Auburn, Alabama. I think Auburn's got one for sure, right? Those be how things go. And Alabama's an interesting case here because they're currently 6th in the AP poll. Again, to move into that 4th 1 seed, Lenardi had to bump them. They lost a couple games in a few weeks back. Alabama finishes with the toughest schedule in America. Probably they got Tennessee, Florida, and Auburn. 1 or 2 of those on the road, including the Auburn game. And if they win all 3 of those, obviously they probably compete to be that second SEC 1 seed in this year's tournament, right? Big 12 had 2 a year. I believe it was 2, and maybe 1 year ago. Anyway, Big 12's had their fair share of times they've had 2. I think this year it's just an SEC turn to have 2. That's the way things go, right? I don't think they'll get 3 by any stretch because when Alabama were to move up in that to beat Tennessee, Florida, and Auburn, well, that's another loss to Tennessee and Florida. I don't think you can justify having that many losses as a 1 seed, even in a conference that's having a big year, right? I think Auburn might go from like the first 1 seed to the 3rd or 4th 1 seed, but I don't think a loss drops them a whole lot there. I don't know that I can see a world where Alabama beats all of them, to be frank. I really can't see a world where Alabama beats all of them. They stay a 1 seed or stay competitive for a 1 seed, and Alabama moves up, right? That would be kind of what it would take to get Houston out of this as I see it. Houston's got 3 very winnable games. They'll probably be the favorite in each of them as the lines come out and we get closer. They got Cincinnati on Saturday, Kansas on Monday, and Baylor the following weekend. Baylor's kind of taken a nosedive as of late. They lost Cincinnati on Tuesday night. Baylor's a better team at home than they are on the road. So right, you're playing them in Waco this time. But you got Kansas at home. You beat them in double overtime at their place, and their season's kind of fallen apart ever since. You might have broken Kansas. Cincinnati has been up and down this year, but you get them at home on Saturday. You got to feel pretty good about that one. Plus, you got enough time in between to kind of recover from the Iowa State, Texas Tech 2 games in 48 hours, turn around and get ready for it. So I think you should feel good about all that. What I can't figure out, though, when I go back and forth waffling on is if any of this one seed stuff even matters. And I might do a whole show on this as we get closer to it because I see all of the argument, right? The one seed, theoretically, every team in your region is worse than you in theory, right? Yes, your 2 seed will be good, your three, those will always be good teams, but theoretically your top dog in in your region, right? You'll uh theoretically have a better say in where you're going. That's not always the case. I want to talk about that in a second, but hopefully you get a better say in where you're going. There isn't a regional that goes through Texas or anything like that. The Final Four being in San Antonio kind of negates all of that, right? But you can have a little bit more say as far as where you're going to end up. Um, but then I go to the 2 seed, I'm like, okay, but either way, right? Whether you're the 1 seed playing the 2 seed or the 2 seed playing the 1 seed, the other team is probably the same team. You're probably just wearing different colored jerseys, right? The 2 seed typically wear their road uniform, right? And as the first 2 seed, you might actually have a better say in what your region is than as the fourth 1 seed, right? Because as the fourth 1 seed, you're just taking whichever one's left. As the first 2 seed, you might actually get a say because it could be open. And I don't know that you would pick by opponent as much as you would pick by location because you want to have fans there and make it as hospitable and feel as close to a home game as possible, right? In that Sweet 16, Elite Eight kind of matchup. So I go back and forth there. I do think that the thing I have settled on for this Houston Cougar team is the thing that feels different right now than has in several years, knock on wood, is that Houston feels relatively speaking healthy, right? Obviously, Emmanuel Sharp's been banged up some this year. We detailed that earlier. Obviously, you never had McFarland. Obviously, didn't get a whole lot of Ramon, right? And it feels like guys kind of go in and out. There was a moment there was like illness swept through the team or whatever, right? But on the whole, right, I kind of would hedge on that. You've won the Big 12 regular season. Obviously, everyone that suits up is going to try and win the game they're playing in. But like, let's make sure we're healthy. And I'm not a big Big 12 tournament guy. You do, as the 1 seed in that tournament, get the double bye, which is kind of nice. But still, it's still like 3 games in 3 consecutive days there. So you know, I again would probably hedge on health going into the tournament. And if that means you get a 2 seed, I don't think that has to be the end of the world. I do think this team is deserving of a 1 seed. For reference, they have not been down at the end of regulation since the school was playing football games, and the school did not play in a bowl game, right? They have not been down at the end of regulation of a basketball game since November, right? Like this is a long stretch of really good basketball. Teams gotten a lot better. Remember, they played Auburn's second game of the year. Milos Uzan was a +5 in that game, right? And fouls out. They played Alabama just a couple weeks later in Las Vegas, and this NIL thing that we're still trying to figure out what it was and all that at the time. They were figuring out who they were. We were figuring out who we were. Like that's a weird one as well. You feel like you've got, I mean, obviously, Alabama, Locked On Alabama is going to tell you they've gotten better. Locked On Auburn, Zach going to tell you that they've gotten better, right? I'm here to tell you Houston has also gotten a lot better. And part of that is because they had to replace such a big piece from a year ago. Milos has really grown into that role and kind of made it his own. And I mean, no better case of that than the Texas Tech game, right? And so you see how, you know, being healthy, even if you're the 2 seed in Auburn to the 1 seed in the South Regional, you might be okay, right? You might be okay. I could also see ESPN trying to sway it though, where Alabama was the 2 seed in that, so you get some sort of a South Regional between two Southern teams or whatever, right? But But we'll see. I say all that to say that I'm still dissecting if I even care if they're one or the two. I do think this team is deserving of the one seed as far as a reputation goes. And from a content guy's perspective, right? Like we're here at the podcast, being a one seed 3 years in a row would be pretty telling as to what this stretch of Houston Cougar basketball looks like, right? And I think that might be the biggest reason. But hey, I want the recognition because the work's been done. Um, but on the whole, the biggest thing to me is health. Now, that does not mean to let off of the gas, as I want to talk about in just 1 second. Parker Ainsworth locked on Coogs here, talking about Houston and March, wrapping up the Big 12, winning the Big 12 in pretty decisive fashion. And, there's a saying when you beat a team, and I'm not going to say the whole thing, but it's kind of the acronym is BTA, right? And while I think Houston did do some BTA to the conference, uh, the the acronym I want to go with for what comes next is FTG, foot to gas, right? Do not let up off the gas for whoever's on the floor. Now, I understand if you want to say, hey, Emmanuel, that ankle's not feeling so great, don't suit up today. Hey, Jawan, Cincinnati, once we get up 25, you're coming out of the game. Let's get there as fast as we can, right? Hey, those kinds of things, I get it. But everyone that's a part of what's happening, I do think there's reason to keep pushing. Obviously, play for the history, uh, get the most wins in 2 years, extend the lead in conference, right? Like make this thing the kind of thing that people can't avoid talking about later because it's worth talking about. I get that from a historical perspective. I also think there's like a way that you can spend the rest of the season where now you've got to share the Big 12 title and probably win the whole thing outright Saturday, if not Monday right after, where you're really looking to find new things about this team to build on, right? You just had the great Milos Uzan, the closer game. You just had a great LJ Cryer game against Iowa State, right? Continue to find whatever the next thing is. Is that thing LJ Cryer running point? Is that thing playing a three big lineup because Jawan can kind of do some perimeter kind of defensive stuff? Is that thing getting said a lot in there and involved more because he's the bruiser, right? Like, what does that look like for this team? And frankly, I think it behooves you to get that done. We saw last year in the round of 32, right? Houston got to the end of the bench, and Ryan Elvin's playing in that game just from how many guys are either hurt or out with fouls in that one. Keeping the foot to the gas can also mean getting those guys kind of geared up to go because you just never know who's going to need to play. Mercy, Cordell, you just don't know. We may need you very soon. And frankly, I think Mercy could be a secret weapon in that aspect, but that's probably later, closer to March Madness kind of conversation. But Mercy could come off the bench and get some buckets now, and I think that if we got to that A&M kind of situation like they did a year ago, they could scare some folks with all that. Right now, other things I think that you're still like fine tuning and fixing, and I don't mean to belabor this because him playing hard is what makes him so good, but it's also something that leads to a handful of fouls every game. And JoJo Tugler, you know, you're gonna need to play more than 22 minutes in a competitive close game, and that's playing defense without fouling. And there are hustle fouls that happen, like when he dove on a loose ball against Texas Tech, and just like in diving after the ball, someone tripped over him. Like that happens. That's basketball. I don't want him not diving for that ball, right? But then, like when he closed out to a monster double team with his hands down in his pockets, and then like hip checks the guy and like has his hands there too, like that's a foul, right? Close out high, keep your hands high, use every inch of that wingspan. Don't have your hands low, don't foul. Like those are the ones that add up. You're going to get a few for play as hard as he does, doing all the kind of things he does, dive on the floor, fighting for rebounds, whatever, contesting shots at the rim the right way. It's the silly ones I want to get rid of. And so continue to work on that in the course of the next 3 games because you don't want him in foul trouble come March. I feel like earlier this year, you had more when Malik was in the game. He got more involved in the offense. And Malik is a do-right guy. He does whatever he asks him to do whenever he asks him to do it. And I love his impact on this team really over almost 3 seasons now. You go back and listen to him when he was redshirted for the transfer a couple years ago. Sampson talks about how he was the best defender on the team that year and really worked guys in practice because he knew that was his impact on the program. Um, I I felt like this year though when he was in the game, he was more of a part of the offense in the first part of conference play and like the end of non-conference play. Obviously, he has the big shot against Kansas, right? He's a hero for that. But I feel like his offensive production's kind of faded away, and I just don't want that to be something he can't do if we need him to do it, right? So I'd say maybe work that angle a little bit. Terrence Arsenault's done everything but score the ball well for the last like month. Do you want to go in and get him, get him a few possessions, in the mid, 10-minute range of the first half, kind of get him going, feed the ego a little bit there, right? Kind of get him right going into March. Do you want to, you know, expand something here, do something there? There's all kinds of different things you can tinker with and toy with while playing hard. Foot to gas. Do not let off the gas here. Now, again, health is the primary thing. So if Emmanuel's like, Coach, my ankle's bugging me, you can go foot the gas with the other 11 guys, right? I don't mean to say that you can't keep that thing going and keep your foot on that gas pedal. I just mean that, like, you got to kind of balance that and be smart. And Sampson's a brilliant head coach, Hall of Famer very, very soon, I'm sure. And so that's why he gets paid the big bucks to do those things. And Kellen and Quantis, those guys are all very talented. They're all doing the exact same thing, keeping track of that kind of stuff. I'm thinking about like what the point of Cincinnati, Kansas, Baylor. The point's to win, you step on the floor, but what can you be doing? What motivation can you put out there for those guys, right? And I think that's the deal. Now, truthfully, some of that could be making stuff up. I don't know how much you got to motivate this team. The team's seems very self motivated. If you roll the ball out and say we're keeping score, I don't know that you got to tell them anything more than that as far as trying to make sure they fight to win. It's part of the reason this program's so good, part of the reason this team's so good. But I think that's kind of where I'm at as far as what the rest of this goes. Now, I'm working on a Cincinnati Bearcats guest to get some preview into that game in. I watched a little bit of them, including on Tuesday night when they beat Baylor. Feel like I got a little bit of a handle on them. I want to talk about that later this week. Trying to get coordinated with a recruiting guy to talk some about Keyshawn. Scheduling is a little tight because we're in, covering the basketball program and stuff as well, and it's kind of a dead period. He's going out watching sevens and stuff like that to kind of catch him when he's not traveling. So working on that. May have that in the works very soon. Got one or two other things in the oven that are cooking up a little bit as well. Obviously, anything breaking happens, anything big happens, we're here to break it down each and every day at Locked on Coogs, your best place for daily content on Houston Cougars. So stay subscribed and hit the bell so you know we're live. We're going to be live after the game. Just a heads up, if you like the longer shows, the post game for Cincinnati will probably be short. The afternoon game kind of cuts the middle of the day funny. Just depends on how quickly that game goes. So just giving you a heads up that scheduling conflict may have just come up today. So more on that as we get there. But I got to get my thoughts. We got to get my Bearcat buddy I'm getting on if we can get scheduled correctly on the thing as well. All kinds of fun stuff. Happy to do it. Happy to find you on social media. Find me at Painsworth512 on most everything. I'm at Painsworth Sports on Instagram. Yeah, I'm still getting the hang of TikTok. I think so. Anyway, find me on TikTok. Let me know what you think. Locked on Coogs, primarily the Locked On Podcast Network. For your second listen, thank you for making it your first, but your second listen, Locked On College Basketball did a segment on Houston yesterday. Go check that one out. Show them that people listen when they talk about Houston. Because now you listen to me, but like show the whole network that we listen to Houston when they do Houston, right? Locked On Coogs, primarily the Locked On Podcast Network means your team every day. Go Coogs.